Number 1. Drew Peterson. Drew Peterson was the kind of police officer people trusted. He wore the badge for nearly 3 decades in Bolingbrook, Illinois. Neighbors described him as confident, charming in public, and always in control. But behind closed doors, life at the Peterson home was anything but ordinary. Drew married 4 times. His 3rd wife, Kathleen Savio, and his 4th wife, Stacy Peterson, would later become central to one of the most shocking cases involving a law enforcement officer in American history. Kathleen and Drew divorced in 2003 after a turbulent relationship. She told friends she was afraid of him and even said if something ever happened to her, it wouldn't be an accident. In March 2004, Kathleen was found unresponsive in her bathtub. Authorities at the time ruled it an accidental drowning. There were no obvious signs of forced entry, and Drew, her ex-husband, was still a respected sergeant on the police force. The case was quickly closed. A year later, Drew married a much younger woman named Stacy Cales, who became Stacy Peterson. She was just 19 when they met. Friends and family noticed Drew controlling where she went and who she spoke to. Still, in public, he played the role of a loving husband and dedicated father to his blended family. Everything changed on October 28, 2007. Stacy disappeared. She was just 23 years old. Drew claimed she left him voluntarily, saying she ran away with another man and abandoned her children, but her family didn't believe it for a second. Stacy adored her kids. She had no money, no car, and no reason to disappear without a trace. When Stacy vanished, the spotlight turned back to Kathleen's death from 3 years earlier. Investigators started asking questions. How did 2 of Peterson's wives end up either dead or missing? Why did both women express fear of him before they disappeared? Kathleen's body was exhumed for a second autopsy. This time, medical examiners found injuries inconsistent with an accident. They concluded her death was not a slip in the bathtub, but a homicide. That finding reopened the case, and Drew Peterson was now the prime suspect. Several people came forward with chilling information. Stacy had allegedly told friends and family that Drew admitted to killing Kathleen and making it look like an accident. Illinois law allowed this testimony under what's known as hearsay exception statements made by a victim who is no longer alive or available to testify. In 2009, Drew Peterson was arrested for the murder of Kathleen Savio. The trial began in 2012 and was followed closely by media around the world. The prosecution built its case on forensic evidence, inconsistencies in Peterson's story, and the statements Stacy made before she disappeared. Even without Stacy's body, her words helped convict him. In September 2012, Drew Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder for the death of Kathleen Savio. He was sentenced to 38 years in prison. As he was led out of the courtroom, he reportedly shouted, "I did not kill Kathleen." That wasn't the end. In 2015, while already behind bars, Peterson was charged again, this time for attempting to hire someone to harm the prosecutor who put him in prison. He was convicted and received an additional 40-year sentence. To this day, Stacy Peterson has never been found. She is still considered a missing person, and her case remains open. Her family continues to search for answers and hopes her remains will one day be discovered so they can finally lay her to rest. Drew Peterson went from decorated police officer to one of the most infamous criminals in modern American history. He used his law enforcement knowledge, authority, and charm to manipulate those around him and disguise the truth for years. But despite his efforts to maintain control, the truth eventually caught up. This case shattered public trust not just in one man, but in the idea that wearing a badge automatically means integrity. It raised serious questions about how domestic abuse cases involving police officers are handled and how easily warning signs can be dismissed when someone appears respectable on the surface. Today, Peterson remains in prison. He will likely spend the rest of his life there. Kathleen Savio finally received justice. Stacy Peterson's family is still waiting for theirs. Number 2. Martin McNeil. Martin McNeil seemed like the definition of success. He was a doctor, a lawyer, a father of 8 children, and a well-respected figure in his Utah community. To anyone on the outside, he and his wife, Michelle, had the perfect life. But behind that polished image was a husband living a double life, a man whose secrets would eventually destroy his family. Michelle McNeil was known as kind, gentle, and devoted to her children. She met Martin when she was just 21. Over the years, she supported him through medical school and law school, building what seemed like a strong marriage and a stable home. But things shifted when Martin began an affair with a woman named Gypsy Willis. He wanted to be with her, but there was one obstacle: his wife. In early 2007, Martin convinced Michelle she needed a cosmetic facelift. She wasn't eager about it, but he kept pushing. He even chose the surgeon. Friends later said Michelle was nervous. She said Martin was giving her strange medications, and she didn't feel safe. On April 11th, 2007, everything changed. Just days after her surgery, Michelle was found unresponsive in the bathtub of their home. Martin called emergency services. When first responders arrived, they found him performing CPR, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead. Her death was ruled accidental, possibly linked to heart problems and the medications from surgery. But something felt wrong to Michelle's daughters. 3 of them, Alexis, Rachel, and Giselle, immediately suspected their father. They claimed he was acting unusually, calm, rushed to have their mother buried, and didn't want an autopsy. Alexis, who was in medical school at the time, had been keeping track of what medications her mother was taking. The doses didn't make sense. Some pills were missing. Others, Michelle said she never wanted to take, were found in her system. Then, only weeks after Michelle's death, Martin allowed his mistress, Gypsy Willis, to move into the family home, claiming she was the new nanny. He even attempted to replace his adopted daughter's social security number with Gypsy's so she could take her identity. That was when his children knew they had to take action. The daughters reported their suspicions to authorities. At first, investigators weren't convinced. Martin was a doctor, respected, intelligent. There was no physical proof of foul play. But the daughters didn't stop. They pushed for the case to be reopened, and finally, months later, Michelle's body was exhumed. When the toxicology reports came back, they revealed something alarming. Michelle had multiple powerful drugs in her system: sedatives, painkillers, and anti-anxiety medication, far beyond what she'd been prescribed. Investigators believed Martin had drugged her, then left her in a vulnerable state where she could not survive. Still, making it a criminal case was complicated. There were no witnesses and no clear physical evidence of direct violence. But then came mistakes, Martin's own mistakes. He was found guilty in a separate fraud case involving identity theft with Gypsy Willis. While serving time for that, prosecutors built a murder case. They gathered testimony from inmates who claimed Martin bragged about getting away with murder. They reviewed computer records showing he searched for drug combinations that could be lethal. And most importantly, they had the voices of his daughters, who stood firmly against him in court. In 2012, Martin McNeil was officially charged with murder. The trial began in 2013. It was emotional. Michele's daughters sat only feet away from the man they once called their hero, now on trial for killing their mother. The defense claimed her death was still an accident. But the prosecution argued it was a carefully planned act, motivated by an affair and fueled by manipulation. After hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Martin McNeil was sentenced to life in prison without parole. When the sentence was read, the courtroom was silent, then filled with tears, not just from the prosecution side, but from the daughters who had fought for justice for 6 long years. In 2017, McNeil died in prison. Authorities say he took his own life. Today, Michelle McNeil is remembered by her children as a loving mother who never stopped caring for them. Her daughters, especially Alexis, became powerful voices for victims of domestic abuse and suspicious deaths that may otherwise be dismissed. This case is a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always look like a stranger in the dark. It can come from someone respected, intelligent, and trusted. Number 3. Mark Jensen. Julie Jensen sensed something terrible long before it happened. She was a mother of 2, living in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. To neighbors, her life looked peaceful. She had a husband, Mark Jensen, a stable home, and 2 young boys. But what no one knew at the time was that Julie had begun to fear the man sleeping next to her. Julie wrote a letter and gave it to a neighbor with one request: only open it if something ever happened to her. In that letter, she said these exact words: "If anything happens to me, Mark did it." That letter became one of the most chilling pieces of evidence ever used in an American courtroom. Julie and Mark married in 1984. At first, Mark was seen as a friendly, quiet man, smart, reserved, a financial advisor with a reputation for being organized and responsible. But inside their marriage, things were falling apart. Mark began an affair with a coworker, and Julie discovered emails and phone messages that confirmed it. She confronted him, and friends said she was devastated. Soon after, Julie told people she felt sick constantly. She accused Mark of tampering with her food and drinks. She told coworkers, friends, and her children's teachers that she believed he was trying to poison her. People were unsure if it was paranoia or real danger. On December 3rd, 1998, Julie was found unresponsive in their home. She passed away before emergency services arrived. Authorities initially believed it was suicide or natural causes. There were no clear signs of a struggle. But then toxicology tests revealed something unusual. Julie had ethylene glycol in her system. That's the main chemical found in antifreeze. Mark insisted she took it herself. He said she had been depressed, overwhelmed, and emotionally unstable. But friends and family strongly disagreed. Julie's parents demanded answers. They told investigators about the letter she wrote, the one blaming her husband if she died. When investigators searched the Jensen home, they found Julie's letter, her handwritten notes, and a list of online searches Mark made on topics like poisoning, how to hide a crime, and antifreeze. They also found a printed computer message in which Mark told his mistress that life would be easier if Julie were no longer around. Investigators also discovered Mark made no attempts to help her the morning she died. He did not call 911 immediately. Instead, he waited hours before alerting anyone. Prosecutors said this was not the behavior of a concerned husband. It was the behavior of someone who knew exactly what was happening. Despite all this, the case didn't go to trial right away. It took nearly a decade. For years, legal debates revolved around one question: could Julie's letter be used in court? The defense said it was hearsay. Julie wasn't alive to testify. The prosecution said it was her voice from the grave, a warning the world needed to hear. Finally, in 2008, the trial began. Julie's letter was allowed as evidence. It became the emotional center of the case. Jurors heard how Julie feared for her life. They saw her handwriting. They read her words: "I would never leave my boys. Mark wants me gone." Prosecutors argued that Mark poisoned Julie over time to make it look like a suicide so he could be with his mistress and collect life insurance. They said he kept her weak and isolated before giving her a final dose of drugs. The defense said Julie was depressed, took her own life, and framed her husband out of anger. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict: guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. Mark Jensen was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But the story didn't end there. In 2021, a court ruled that Julie's letter may have unfairly influenced the jury. Mark Jensen was granted a new trial. In 2023, nearly 25 years after Julie's death, he went back to court. The prosecutors presented updated evidence: emails, internet searches, medical records, and testimony from friends and family. This time, the letter wasn't used. Even without it, the jury still found him guilty again. Mark Jensen remains in prison for the rest of his life. Julie's legacy became a symbol of something rarely discussed: victims who sense danger but are not believed. Her letter became known nationwide as the letter from the grave. It showed how far someone might go to warn others, even preparing evidence for their own death. This case raised major legal debates about hearsay, victim testimony, and how far courts should go to protect the voices of the dead. It also highlighted how appearances: a stable family, a quiet husband, a nice house in a quiet town, can hide the darkest truths. Today, their two sons are adults. They were in the home when their mother died. They lived through the trials of both. Parents first losing their mother, then seeing their father convicted. Julie's final act, writing that letter, may have been the most courageous thing she ever did. It didn't save her life, but it helped reveal the truth, and it helped deliver justice. Number 4. Richard Crafts. In the quiet town of Newtown, Connecticut, people believed they knew their neighbors. Especially Richard and Helly Crafts, a married couple with 3 young children, a comfortable home, and stable careers. Hella was a flight attendant from Denmark, bright and well-liked. Richard was an airline pilot and part-time police officer. To most people, they looked like a normal family. But their marriage was falling apart. By 1986, Hella had discovered that Richard was having multiple affairs. She told friends she was afraid of him not because of loud arguments or threats, but because of his coldness. One friend said Helly once told her, "If something happens to me, don't think it was an HODU accident." Helly had hired a private investigator to follow Richard. The investigator confirmed her fears he was cheating. She began quietly preparing to divorce him. On November 18th, 1986, Hella Crafts was seen for the last time. She finished a flight, returned home, and then vanished. Days passed with no word. Her friends called the house, but Richard claimed she had left on vacation. But Helly never told anyone she was going anywhere. She didn't take her passport. She didn't take clothes. She disappeared without warning. Her friends reported her missing. Police initially hesitated. There was no body, no crime scene, but something felt off. Richard avoided questions. He hired a lawyer immediately. Then a snowstorm hit, one of the biggest in Connecticut history, which made any outdoor evidence nearly impossible to find. But investigators kept going. They discovered something strange just days before Hella disappeared. Richard had bought a wood chipper. He rented it late at night and returned it early in the morning. A snowplow driver came forward and said he saw a man near a river with a wood chipper at 3 a.m. in the middle of the storm. That detail changed everything. Police searched the area along the riverbank, and what they found didn't look like much. A piece of fabric, a small piece of bone, part of a tooth, fingernail-like fragments, everything tiny but human. No full body, no obvious crime scene. Still, forensic scientists stepped in, and this became one of the most important forensic cases in U.S. history. Using microscopes and DNA comparison, experts confirmed that the fragments were human, and they belonged to Hella Crafts. They also found chainsaw marks on tiny bone pieces. Investigators discovered Richard had purchased a chainsaw shortly before she went missing, and he filed off the serial number. But forensic experts restored the number, proving it was his. Forensic science proved something prosecutors had never done before. They brought a murder case with no complete body, no eyewitnesses, and no confession. Richard Crafts was arrested in January 1987. The trial received national attention. The media called it the wood chipper murder. The defense argued there was no full body, so the evidence wasn't enough. The prosecution said the evidence, though small, was overwhelming. The riverbank fragments, the chainsaw, the lies, the affair, the purchase of the wood chipper, it all created a full picture. After a mistrial due to a hung jury, a second trial began. This time, the jury agreed. Richard Crafts was guilty of murder. In 1989, Richard was sentenced to 50 years in prison, the first person in Connecticut history to be convicted of murder without a complete body. This case changed legal history. It proved that a murderer cannot rely on destroying evidence to escape responsibility. Forensic science, tiny bone fragments, a single tooth, a bit of fabric told the story of what happened when no one else could. The most haunting part of all this is Helly herself, a woman who felt danger coming, who tried to get out, who left behind quiet warnings. She trusted her instincts. Sadly, the system didn't respond to those warnings until it was too late. Richard Crafts served decades in prison. In early 2020, after serving more than 30 years, he was released early due to good behavior and health issues. Many people were stunned. He walked out of prison after being part of one of the most infamous murder cases in American history. But the impact of the case remained. It taught investigators to trust small evidence. It taught the legal system that a body is not always required for justice. And it served as a reminder. The truth can still come out even when someone tries to make it disappear. Number 5. Hans Reiser. Hans Reiser was not a typical criminal. He was a computer genius, a founder of a Silicon Valley software company, and the Mahdi, creator of the famous Reiser FS file system used in Linux operating systems. He built technology used worldwide. But behind all the innovation and intellect was a collapsing marriage, custody battles, and a disappearance that would expose a much darker side of him. Hans met Nina Sharonova in Russia. She was a Russian-born medical student. They married in 1999 and moved to California. They had 2 young children and tried building a life together. But friends say their relationship was unstable from the beginning: cultural clashes, long work hours, arguments, jealousy. In 2004, Nina filed for divorce, claiming Hans was controlling and emotionally unstable. Things got worse. They fought over custody of their children. Nina said she felt unsafe. Hans accused her of trying to take his kids away. Their divorce became bitter, expensive, and personal. Then, on the 3rd of September, 2006, Nina vanished. She was last seen dropping off the children at Hans's house after spending the weekend with them. She never picked them up again. Her car was found abandoned near her home. Her purse, ID, and belongings were still inside. She simply disappeared. At first, Hans said he didn't know where she went. He suggested she might have run away, gone back to Russia, or left to start a new life. But police weren't convinced. Nina had made appointments for the next day. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't take her passport. She never went anywhere without her cell phone or telling someone she trusted. Suspicion fell directly onto Hans. When detectives searched his home and car, they noticed strange details. The passenger seat of his car was missing. Carpet had been removed. There were traces of blood in his vehicle, small but confirmed to be Nina's through DNA testing. Even stranger, Hans started acting in ways no innocent person normally would. He used his business partner's credit cards to buy books about police procedures. He placed his trash bags in bizarre locations to avoid being tracked. He walked around town with large amounts of cash taped to his body. He dramatically altered his behavior in court, and during questioning, sometimes arrogant, sometimes emotionless. Investigators didn't have a body. They didn't know where Nina was, but they had enough circumstantial evidence to arrest Hans Reiser for murder in October 2006. His trial began in late 2007. Prosecutors argued he killed Nina during a custody dispute. They said his motive was simple. He could not stand losing control of his children, his marriage, or how people perceived him. Hans, representing himself at times, tried to argue that Nina was alive. He gave long, complex explanations, complained about investigators, and suggested she had faked her disappearance to frame him. But his story had no proof. The jury watched his behavior and saw no grief, no concern, just cold logic and calculations. Still, the case was risky. No body, no murder weapon, no witness. Then, in an unexpected move, Hans made a deal. Before the jury could make a final decision, he agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder, but only if he could lead police to Nina's body in exchange for a reduced sentence. In July 2008, he took detectives to a remote area in the Oakland Hills. Under piles of dirt and leaves, they found Nina's remains. The case was no longer a mystery, it was a confession. Hans Reiser was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. His decision to reveal the location of her body shocked many. The man famous for perfect logic, optimization, and control finally lost all control. And the truth he had tried so hard to bury came to light. Their 2 children were placed in the care of Nina's mother in Russia. Hans later tried to regain parental rights from prison. The courts denied him. This case became known worldwide, not just because of the crime, but because it involved a brilliant programmer who helped build part of the internet's infrastructure, yet couldn't control his own life, his emotions, or his anger. Hans Reiser's fall was a reminder that intelligence does not equal integrity, and logic cannot erase guilt. Number 6. Brad King. Brad King looked like the last person anyone would suspect. He was a respected communications professor at a Michigan university. His wife, Diane Newton King, was a local TV news anchor, well-known, well-liked, and the face of evening news in Battle Creek, Michigan. They were the kind of couple small towns admire: successful, educated, photogenic. To the outside world, they had a peaceful life on a quiet farmhouse property. But behind their front door, their marriage was falling apart. By 1991, friends said Diane seemed uneasy. She reportedly confided that the marriage wasn't what it appeared to be. She suspected Brad of being unfaithful. Their finances were strained. And there was something else she told a lawyer: she was planning to separate from him soon. Then, on the 13th of January 1991, everything changed. That cold winter morning, Diane and Brad drove home from church with their 2 young children in the car. As they pulled into their rural driveway, Brad said he'd get the mail. Diane drove ahead toward the house. Moments later, Brad claimed he heard a loud noise like a gunshot. He said he ran back to the driveway and found Diane in the family van. He dialed 911 and told police someone had shot his wife in a random attack, then disappeared. Police arrived quickly. But something was off. There were no footprints in the snow except for Brad's. No signs of a struggle. No tire tracks from another car. Nothing was stolen. And whoever did it seemed to appear and vanish in seconds, in broad daylight, on a quiet road, with no witnesses. It made no sense. Investigators began looking closely at Brad's story, and cracks appeared fast. He said he was at the mailbox, but that mailbox was far from where Diane was found. They asked if he was that far away. How did he hear a single gunshot over the noise of the car engine and winter wind? He had no answer. Diane's family told detectives she was about to leave Brad. Later, police discovered Brad was having an affair with another woman. There was also a $300,000 life insurance policy he would collect if Diane died. Then came the most significant detail: gunshot residue was found on Brad King's hands and clothing. Investigators concluded the shot came from inside or near the vehicle, not from someone hidden in the woods. Slowly, Brad's story fell apart. Detectives believed he staged the entire scene, waited until Diane was alone in the vehicle, then created the appearance of a random ambush. He called 911 only after everything was positioned to look like an outside attack. But there was no evidence of anyone else. No forced entry, no robbery, no witness. Just Brad, a troubled marriage, an affair, money problems, and a story that didn't match physics or footprints. In 1992, Brad King was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. During the trial, the prosecution painted a clear picture: a man who wanted freedom from a failing marriage, from financial stress, and from consequences. They argued he believed that if Diane died by someone else's hand, he would gain custody of the children, sympathy from the community, and a large insurance payout. The defense said Brad was innocent, claiming investigators ignored other suspects. But after reviewing the evidence, the jury didn't agree. Brad King was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The community was stunned. This wasn't a career criminal or stranger. It was a husband, a professor, a father, someone people had trusted for years. The case became known not because of violent details, but because of how carefully it was staged and how quickly it unraveled under logic and science. Diane Newton King, meanwhile, is still remembered by viewers and coworkers as a talented journalist and devoted mother. Her final act before her death was dropping her children safely at home. She never got to see justice, but her family did. Brad King remains in prison to this day. Number 7. Fotis Dulos. Jennifer Farber Dulos was a devoted mother of 5 living in New Canaan, Connecticut, one of the safest towns in America. She was going through a difficult divorce and custody battle with her estranged husband, Fotis Dulos, a luxury home builder, successful on the outside, but drowning in secrets behind closed doors. Jennifer and Fotis married in 2004. She came from a wealthy New York family, while he was known for building multi-million-dollar estates. At first, their life looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine: beautiful homes, private schools, luxury cars. But over time, Jennifer began feeling unsafe. She filed for divorce in 2017, telling the court she was afraid of her husband's temper and unpredictable behavior. In court documents, she said he was controlling and had threatened to take their kids away. She moved with the children into a rental home and got a court order restricting his access. Fotis denied everything. He claimed she was trying to destroy his reputation and keep the kids from him. The divorce dragged on for 2 years, full of accusations, legal battles, and emotional tension. Then, on the 24th of May 2019, Jennifer dropped her kids off at school as usual. She returned home and vanished. She missed appointments. She didn't pick up her children. Her friends panicked and reported her missing by evening. Police arrived at her house and immediately saw signs of a serious struggle. There was blood in the garage, later confirmed to be Jennifer's. Investigators believed she was attacked after returning home from the school run. Very quickly, suspicion turned toward Fotis Dulos. Surveillance footage from Hartford, Connecticut showed something chilling just hours after her disappearance. Fotis and his girlfriend, Michelle Troconis, driving around the city at night, throwing garbage bags into multiple public trash bins. Police recovered those bags. Inside were items stained with Jennifer's blood, along with zip ties, cleaning supplies, and clothing linked to Fotis. Still, Jennifer's body was never found. Even without a body, the amount of physical evidence was overwhelming. Detectives pieced together a timeline using surveillance videos, phone data, employee testimonies, and DNA evidence. Fotis maintained his innocence, claiming Jennifer ran away or harmed herself and set him up. But the evidence told a different story. Jennifer had no plans to leave, no history of self-harm, and no reason to disappear. In January 2020, Fotis was arrested and charged with capital murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. His girlfriend, Michelle Troconis, and his friend and lawyer, Kent Mulvaney, were also charged with helping cover up the crime. Fotis was released on bond and placed on house arrest with a GPS monitor. But before the case could go to trial, everything took a tragic turn. On the 28th of January 2020, when Fotis failed to appear in court, police checked his house. They found him inside an SUV in the garage, unconscious. He had attempted to take his own life. He was taken to the hospital but passed away 2 days later. In a note police found, he continued to claim he was innocent. The case didn't end. His girlfriend, Michelle Troconis, still faced trial. In March 2024, a Connecticut jury found her guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, evidence tampering, and hindering prosecution. She is now awaiting sentencing. Family friend and attorney Kent Mulvaney is also still facing charges. But Jennifer's remains have never been found. Her 5 children now live with Jennifer's mother in New York. They have stayed out of the public eye, supported by family and protected from the media. This case shocked people, not because of graphic details, but because of what it represented. A mother who did everything right to leave an unsafe marriage, used the legal system for protection, and still disappeared. A wealthy, educated man who tried to create a version of reality where he was the victim, and a justice system still searching for the full truth without the most important piece, Jennifer herself. Jennifer Dulos' case became a symbol for domestic violence awareness and the failures within custody courts when warning signs are ignored. Her friends and family continue to push for laws in her name policies that would require courts to take abuse allegations seriously before tragedy occurs. Fotis Dulos died before facing a jury, but the evidence against him, the ongoing convictions of his accomplices, and the forensic trail left behind made one thing clear: justice did not end with his death. Number 8. Michael Blagg. In 2001, the Blagg family seemed like the picture of suburban life in Grand Junction, Colorado. Michael Blagg worked as an operations manager for a local company. His wife, Jennifer, was a stay-at-home mother dedicated to raising their 6-year-old daughter, Abby. To neighbors and their church community, they appeared like a normal, loving family. But on the morning of November 13th, 2001, everything changed. At 8:30 a.m., Michael dialed 911. He was panicked. He said he'd come home from work to find blood in the master bedroom and his wife and daughter missing. He told police there had been a break-in, that someone had taken Jennifer and Abby. News of the disappearance spread quickly. Volunteers searched the fields, roads, and neighborhoods. Flyers went up. The case drew statewide attention. But from the very beginning, detectives noticed something that didn't quite fit. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, no ransacked rooms, no footprints outside. Yet the blood found in the bedroom was significant too much to match a simple injury. Detectives gently questioned Michael, who said he had left for work early that morning, around 6 a.m., and returned home at 8:17 a.m. That gap in time became critical. As investigators dug deeper, troubling details surfaced. Michael had been fired from his job just before the disappearance but hadn't told his wife. Their finances were falling apart. Debt, stress, and tension were building. Michael also admitted to secretly watching inappropriate content online, something Jennifer had found out about and disapproved of. Detectives continued to search for Abby and Jennifer, but days turned to weeks, then months, and no trace of them was found. Then came a major break in a place no one expected. 6 months later, investigators searched the Mesa County landfill. This was the same landfill where trash from Michael's workplace was taken. They began digging by hand through thousands of tons of trash. Then, on June 4th, 2002, they made a discovery, a black garbage bag. Inside was the body of Jennifer Blagg, wrapped in bedding taken from the Blagg home. The horror and shock rippled through the community. Michael was immediately arrested. Forensic analysis showed that the bedding, plastic bags, and ties used all came from materials inside the Blagg home, materials only someone living there could access. Prosecutors said Michael killed his wife in the early morning hours of November 13th, placed her in a dumpster at his workplace, and staged the house to look like a kidnapping. As for Abby, she was never found. Investigators believe she also died that day, although Michael was never tried separately for her death. The trial began in 2004. Prosecutors laid out their timeline: a crumbling marriage, financial stress, a husband living a double life online, and a staged crime scene. Defense attorneys argued there was no direct evidence placing Michael at the landfill, no eyewitnesses, and no confirmed cause of death. They painted him as a devastated father and husband who had lost everything. But the jury didn't buy it. Michael Blagg was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. That seemed like the end, but the case wasn't over yet. In 2014, more than a decade later, his conviction was overturned. A juror in the original trial had lied during jury selection. She had hidden her own history of domestic violence. Michael was granted a new trial. In 2018, 17 years after Jennifer's death, the second trial began. New jury, same evidence, same story. After weeks of testimony, the jury again found Michael Blagg guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced, once again, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for Abby, her remains have never been found. Her disappearance remains one of the most heartbreaking parts of this case. Jennifer's family said they fought for justice, not just for her, but for Abby, a little girl whose life ended before it began. Today, Michael Blagg remains in a Colorado prison. His name stands alongside other husbands who tried to disguise tragedy as mystery and who believed that a staged crime scene would erase the truth. But evidence, even when buried, has a way of coming back. Number 9. Mark Winger. In 1995, Mark and Donna Winger looked like the perfect young couple. They lived in Springfield, Illinois. Mark was a nuclear engineer. Donna worked as an operating room technician. They had recently adopted a baby girl named Bailey and were settling into family life. But one phone call changed everything. On August 23rd, Donna took a ride home from the airport in a shuttle van. The driver, a 27-year-old man named Roger Harrington, made unsettling comments and drove recklessly. Donna came home upset and told Mark everything. Mark reported the driver to his employer and even the police. The situation was documented, so when tragedy struck days later, it looked like an open and shut case. On August 29th, 1995, Mark Winger called 911. He said he had just shot an intruder who was attacking his wife with a hammer. When police arrived, they found Donna fatally injured and Roger Harrington dead on the floor. Mark told officers he heard a noise, ran into the room, saw Harrington harming his wife, grabbed his gun, and shot him. The story made sense. Roger Harrington had acted unstable earlier. Donna had been scared. Now he was dead inside their home. Mark was seen as a grieving hero who saved his wife but was too late. The case was closed. Friends and family rallied around Mark. He raised his daughter alone. But then, something strange happened. Less than 6 months after Donna's death, Mark started a romantic relationship with the woman who had been their nanny, a woman named Rebecca Simic. They married in 1996. To outsiders, Mark seemed to be slowly building a new life. But Donna's best friend, Deanne Schultz, couldn't let it go. She told police she had been having an affair with Mark before Donna's death. She also said Mark had talked about wanting Donna gone. At first, nobody listened. The case was considered solved. But years later, a new detective took another look. Officer Paul Carpenter reviewed old files. He noticed details that didn't match Mark's story, like the position of the bodies, blood patterns, and timing of the 911 call. Something didn't fit. Why was the alleged intruder hit multiple times, yet Mark never had signs of struggling? Why was there no evidence Roger had even moved toward Donna's body? Why did Mark immediately call a lawyer before Donna was even buried? Then came the biggest breakthrough: a notebook found in storage from the original investigation. A detective had written down that Mark had drawn a diagram of the crime scene to explain what happened, but the drawing placed Roger's body in a spot that didn't match reality. It was as if he knew ahead of time where Roger would fall. Investigators believed this. Mark Winger invited Roger Harrington to his home under the pretense of talking things out. He then attacked Donna first, killed Roger, and staged it to look like self-defense. He thought it was the perfect setup: crazy shuttle driver, husband protecting wife. He almost got away with it. In 2001, 6 years later, Mark Winger was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder: the murder of his wife and the murder of Roger Harrington. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Mark planned everything. He used the previous shuttle incident to create a ready-made suspect. They said he wanted a new life without divorce, without losing money, and with full custody of his baby. The defense claimed Mark was still a hero protecting his family. But phone records, crime scene evidence, and witnesses contradicted him. In 2002, Mark Winger was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Years later, from prison, he tried to hire someone to kill his former lover, Rebecca, and a witness who testified against him. That earned him an additional 35-year sentence in 2007. The case left deep scars. Donna's family waited years for justice. Roger Harrington's family endured being told their son was a murderer, only to find out he was a victim. And Rebecca, who married Mark believing he was a widower who'd lost his wife tragically, was left alone to raise 4 children after learning the truth. To this day, people talk about this case because of its haunting question: how many people believed a lie simply because it sounded believable? Mark Winger proved that even the most carefully staged scene can't hide the truth forever. Number 10. Stephen Zelich. Stephen Zelich once worked in law enforcement, a former police officer, and later a security guard in Wisconsin. To most people, he seemed quiet, unremarkable, maybe a bit withdrawn, but far from dangerous. No one imagined that years later he would be connected to one of the most disturbing missing persons investigations in the Midwest, a case that began with 2 abandoned suitcases found on the side of a rural highway. Before everything unraveled, Zelich lived a surprisingly average life. He served as a police officer in West Allis, Wisconsin, in the 1,992nd. He resigned after an unrelated incident, left law enforcement, and took a job as a hotel security guard. Quiet, private, and reserved. That was how neighbors described him. But online, he lived a different life. Zelich frequently used chat rooms focused on bondage and control fantasies. That was where he met the women who would later be discovered under tragic circumstances. In June 2014, highway workers in Geneva, Wisconsin, noticed 2 suitcases abandoned in tall grass along a quiet road. They assumed someone dumped trash until they opened them. Inside were 2 women. No identification. No missing persons reports that matched. Investigators only knew one thing: whoever left them there had tried to make them disappear. Police traced the luggage tags and duct tape used back to various hardware stores and security footage. Eventually, Surveillance footage and digital traces led them to a name: Stephen Zelich. Detectives searched his apartment in West Allis. It looked like time had frozen, dark, quiet, curtains shut. Inside, they found a freezer, plastic bags, restraints, and evidence linking Zelich to two missing women: Jenny Gamez, 19, from Oregon, last seen in 2012. Laura Simonson, 37, from Minnesota, last seen in 2013. Both women had met Zelich online, both traveled to meet him voluntarily, and both were never seen again. During questioning, Zelich didn't run or lie. Instead, he calmly admitted his involvement. He claimed both deaths were accidental during private encounters, but investigators quickly determined otherwise. He admitted to storing their remains and eventually moving them in suitcases, abandoning them when they began to draw attention. Still, law enforcement handled the case carefully. No graphic details were shared publicly. No sensational language was used in court. The focus remained on evidence: digital messages, hotel records, restraint equipment, and Zelich's own confession. He was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, one in Wisconsin and one in Minnesota. Over the course of trials from 2016 to 2018, Zelich accepted plea agreements in both cases. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The families of Jenny and Laura spoke in court. They emphasized something important: these women were not foolish or reckless. They trusted someone who appeared safe, someone who had once been a police officer, someone who wore a badge. That betrayal of trust is what made this case so chilling. This story became a disturbing lesson about how online relationships can be manipulated, how someone's quiet, harmless exterior can hide dangerous intentions, and how some predators rely not on force, but trust. Today, Stephen Zelich remains in a Wisconsin prison. He will never be released. And while this case is dark, its legacy is not about fear, it's about awareness. It's about understanding that real danger isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, ordinary, polite,